Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take complex biological systems, break down the intimidating jargon, and extract the core functional knowledge you need.
Today we are undertaking a massive feat of structural engineering, a top-to-bottom exploration of the digestive system.
Yeah, it's one of those systems we only really notice when it gives us that famous gut feeling, right?
Exactly. But anatomically and physiologically, it is arguably one of the most specialized and heavily coordinated systems in the entire body.
So our mission today is to walk through the entire tract, the alimentary canal, from mouth to anus, and also dive into the accessory organs. We're going to analyze how the body turns a plate of food into molecules it can actually use.
It's a huge topic. So to start, you really have to define the two main components.
Okay.
First, there's the digestive tract itself. Think of it as one continuous muscular tube. Pharynx, esophagus, stomach, intestines. That's the main pathway.
And the second part would be the accessory organs.
Precisely. These are the crucial helpers. You've got the teeth and tongue doing mechanical work, and then the big glandular players. Salivary glands, liver, gallbladder, and the pancreas.
They provide all the chemical tools, basically.
They do. And the whole process, everything they do, it boils down to 7 key functions. First up is just getting the food in ingestion.
Simple enough. Then you have to break it down physically. That's mechanical processing.
Right. The chewing, the churning in the stomach. All that sets the stage for the real chemistry, which is digestion, the enzymatic breakdown.
But you need the enzymes first, which brings us to secretion.
The acids, the buffers, the enzymes, all of it. Once the nutrients are broken down, we hit the most critical step, absorption.
Moving those useful molecules into the body.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's cleanup. Excretion handles waste products, especially from the liver.
And the very last stop.
Compaction.
Yeah.
That's where you dehydrate what's left over, turning it into feces. The whole thing is just this massive, incredibly efficient processing line.
Okay, so let's unpack the architecture of that line. What's amazing to me is that most of this, 30-foot-long tract shares the same basic 4-layered blueprint.
It does. And understanding that histological pattern from the inside out is the key to seeing how different regions are specialized.
So start us on the inside, at the interface with the food, the mucosa.
The mucosa is that inner lining. It's an epithelium over a layer of connective tissue called the lamina propria.
And the type of epithelium changes depending on the job, right?
It's a direct reflection of its function. In high-friction areas like the mouth or esophagus, you get a tough, protective, stratified squamous epithelium.
But not in the intestines.
No, in the stomach and intestines where you're secreting and absorbing, it switches to simple columnar epithelium.
So its structure is totally flexible based on local needs.
Perfectly put. And deep in that mucosa, there's also a tiny band of smooth muscle, the muscularis mucosae, that helps the lining fold and shift.
Okay, moving outward from there, we hit the submucosa. This sounds like the supply layer.
It really is. It's dense connective tissue full of blood vessels, lymphatics, and crucially, the submucosal plexus.
Also known as Meissner's plexus.
That's the one. It's part of the gut's own nervous system, helping to regulate secretions.
Now for the real powerhouse.
Yeah.
The muscularis externa. This is where the movement happens.
This is the engine room. It's a thick, smooth muscle layer, typically an inner circular layer and an outer longitudinal layer.
And that movement is coordinated by another nerve network.
Yes, the mesenteric plexus or Auerbach's plexus, which sits right between those two muscle sheets.
And what's on the very outside?
It depends on the location. If the organ is inside the peritoneal cavity, like the stomach, it's covered by the serosa.
But if it's not?
If it's fixed to the body wall, like the esophagus, it's wrapped in a fibrous layer called the adventitia.
You know, that smooth muscle is really unique. You mentioned its plasticity.
Yes, its ability to stretch an incredible amount without contracting. It's absolutely vital for an organ like the stomach that has to hold a big meal.
And its movements are controlled by pacemaker cells, which create 2 distinct patterns. The first is peristalsis.
That's the propulsive wave. It's very coordinated. The circular muscles contract behind the food, squeezing it, while the longitudinal muscles ahead of it shorten the tube.
So as a forward push, what's the other movement?
Segmentation. If peristalsis is for transport, segmentation is for mixing. It's just local churning and fragmenting. No real forward movement, just intense mixing with digestive juices.
Right, and holding all these organs in place are the mesenteries.
Right, these double sheets of peritoneal membrane that suspend the tract and provide a route for all those blood vessels and nerves.
They also define whether an organ is intraperitoneal, like the stomach, or retroperitoneal, like the kidneys.
Exactly. And then you have some that become fixed later, the secondarily retroperitoneal organs like the pancreas.
And clinically, if that peritoneal membrane gets inflamed, that's peritonitis.
A very serious condition. And if fluid builds up in that space, usually from liver or heart failure, that's ascites.
Okay, let's start the actual journey of food in the oral cavity.
Right. Before you even swallow, the mouth is analyzing, processing, lubricating, and even starting some chemical digestion. It's lined with that tough, non-keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium.
And you have the uvula and soft palate sealing off the passage to the nose when you swallow.
A critical reflex. You don't want food going up there.
The tongue is an absolute workhorse here. It's not just for taste, is it?
Not at all. It manipulates food for chewing, provides sensory data on texture and temperature, and it secretes lingual lipase.
Which starts digesting lipids.
Instantly, even before the food is swallowed.
And lubrication comes from the salivary glands. A lot of it, too.
Between 1 and 1.5 liters a day. It's mostly water, but it's packed with buffers and enzymes.
Let's break down the three main glands. The parotid glands are the big ones.
They are. They produce about 25% of the saliva, and they're rich in salivary amylase, which gets to work on carbohydrates immediately.
And the other two?
The sublingual glands under the tongue make about 5%, mostly thick mucins for lubrication. But the real bulk, 70%, comes from the submandibular glands, which make a mix of everything.
There's a really interesting clinical note here about the mumps virus.
Yes, it loves to target those parotid glands. And while it's usually not too bad in kids, if it infects a post-adolescent male, it can also infect the testes and cause sterility.
Wow. And it can even infect the pancreas.
It can, sometimes leading to temporary or even permanent diabetes. It's a striking example of how interconnected these systems are.
Of course, the first step in all this is mastication, or chewing, with the teeth.
The bulk of the tooth is a hard material called dentine. The crown is covered by enamel, the hardest substance in the body,
And the teeth are locked into the jaw by the periodontal ligament.
in a special joint called a gomphosis. And the types of teeth all have different jobs. Incisors for cutting, cuspids or canines for tearing, and the premolars and molars for grinding.
So once the food is chewed into a bolus, we get to swallowing, or deglutition. It's a three-phase process.
It is, and it shows that switch from conscious to unconscious control. Phase 1 is the buccal phase.
That's the voluntary part, using your tongue to push the bolus back.
Exactly. But the second it hits the pharynx, phase 2 begins, the pharyngeal phase. This is all involuntary reflex. The larynx lifts, the glottis closes.
So breathing stops.
It has to. And pharyngeal muscles push the bolus down. Then finally, the esophageal phase kicks in, and peristalsis takes over completely.
So the esophagus is really just a muscular pipeline, about a foot long, right?
That's it. It's a robust tube lined with that same abrasion-resistant, stratified squamous epithelium.
But its muscularis externa is really fascinating. It's not all the same type of muscle.
No, it transitions. The top third is mostly skeletal muscle for that initial voluntary push. The middle is a mix, and the bottom third is pure, smooth muscle for involuntary peristalsis.
And problems here are often about that sphincter at the bottom. If it doesn't open right, you get achalasia.
Where food can back up, and if it's too wet and lets acid come up from the stomach, you get GERD or esophagitis.
What we call heartburn.
Right. And that brings us to the stomach, the body's dedicated grinding machine.
Its job is storage, mechanical breakdown, and chemical digestion, right? To create that acidic mixture, chyme.
Exactly. It's a J-shaped organ with 4 regions. The cardia at the top, the dome-like fundus, the main body, and the pylorus at the bottom, which is guarded by the pyloric sphincter.
And you can really see the mesenteries here. The lesser omentum connects to the liver, but the greater omentum is that big fatty apron.
Right. It hangs down from the greater curvature, providing insulation and a huge energy reserve.
But the truly unique thing about the stomach's wall is that extra muscle layer.
Yes. The muscularis externa has an inner oblique layer in addition to the circular and longitudinal ones.
Which lets it churn and twist with maximum force.
Precisely. And when the stomach is empty, its lining has those temporary folds, the rugae, that let it expand.
The lining itself is protected by a thick layer of mucus, but underneath that are the gastric glands where all the chemistry happens.
And that's where we find 2 powerhouse cells. First, the parietal cells. They secrete hydrochloric acid, or HCl,
which drops the pH way down to 1.5 or 2.
kills microbes, activates enzymes, and they also secrete intrinsic factor, which you absolutely need to absorb vitamin B12 later on.
And the other key cell type.
The chief cell. It secretes an inactive enzyme called pepsinogen, When that hits the low pH from the HCl, it converts into active pepsin.
And pepsin is what starts digesting proteins.
That's right. And this whole process is ramped up by G cells, which release the hormone gastrin. It stimulates both the parietal and sheath cells.
So when that protective mucus layer fails, you get gastritis or inflammation.
And if it gets worse, a peptic ulcer. Those are erosions of the lining, often caused by the bacterium Helicobacter pylori, which can actually survive under the mucus.
And now that acidic chyme is ready to leave the stomach and enter the small intestine, which is really absorption central.
Absolutely. 90% of all nutrient absorption happens here. And to do that, it needs a massive surface area.
Over 200 square meters, which is incredible. How does it manage that?
Through 3 major structural adaptations. First, you have large, permanent, transverse folds called plicae circularis.
Okay, unlike the temporary rugae in the stomach.
Exactly. Second, these folds are covered in tiny finger-like projections called intestinal villi.
And third, the surface of each individual cell is covered in even tinier projections, the microvilli.
Right, and that forms the brush border. It's this triple-layer system that creates that enormous surface area.
And the small intestine has 3 segments. It starts with the duodenum.
The first 25 centimeters, we call it the mixing bowl because it receives the chyme from the stomach plus all the secretions from the pancreas and liver.
And after that,
Comes the 2.5-meter jejunum. This is where the bulk of chemical digestion and absorption actually happens.
and it ends with the longest section, the ileum.
Right, about 3.5 meters long, ending at the ileocecal valve, which controls flow into the large intestine.
Histologically, you see deep pockets here called intestinal crypts.
Yes, the crypts of Lieberkühn, they're essential. They house the stem cells for epithelial renewal and also the hormone-producing enteroendocrine cells.
And within the villi themselves, you have capillaries, but also those special lymphatic vessels, the lacteals.
Which are there specifically to absorb large fat protein complexes that are too big for the capillaries.
So when that acidic chyme hits the duodenum, it has to be neutralized immediately.
It does, and that's the job of the duodenal submucosal glands, or Brunner's glands. They pump out huge amounts of mucus and bicarbonate buffers to raise the pH from, say, 1.5 up to a much safer 7 or 8.
And down at the other end, in the ileum, you find big clusters of lymphoid tissue.
Peyer's patches. They're a critical defensive line against the massive population of bacteria like E. coli living just on the other side of that ileocecal valve.
And it's those enteroendocrine cells in the duodenum that are coordinating everything with hormones like secretin and CCK.
They are the traffic controllers telling the stomach, liver, and pancreas what to do and when. It's a crucial communication hub.
Which brings us to the final part of the tract, the large intestine. Its main job now is just reabsorbing water and compacting waste.
Pretty much. Reabsorbing water and electrolytes, compacting everything into feces, and absorbing some vitamins that are actually produced by the bacteria living there.
It starts at the cecum, that pouch where the small intestine connects, and that's where the appendix is.
Right, which has a significant lymphatic function.
The colon itself looks very different from the small intestine. It has those pouches, the haustra.
It does. They're created because the outer longitudinal muscle layer is reduced to 3 narrow bands, the taeniae coli. When they contract, they bunch up the colon into those haustra.
And the colon itself is divided into the ascending, transverse, descending, and S-shaped sigmoid colon.
Which then leads to the rectum, the final 15 centimeters of storage.
And when feces move into the rectum, that triggers the defecation reflex.
And we have conscious control over it because of the voluntary external anal sphincter, which is skeletal muscle, that backs up the involuntary smooth muscle internal anal sphincter.
Histologically, what's the big difference here?
The large intestine has no villi at all. Absorption isn't its main job. Instead, it has very deep crypts that are just packed with goblet cells producing mucus.
Lubrication.
Exactly. And movement is slow, mostly haustral churning. But a few times a day, you get these powerful mass movements that push everything towards the rectum.
Okay, now we have to talk about the powerhouse accessory organs, starting with the biggest of them all, the liver.
The largest visceral organ with over 200 functions. We can group them into 3 main categories. First is metabolic regulation.
The central clearinghouse.
It is. All the blood from your digestive tract goes to the liver first through the hepatic portal system. The liver then adjusts the levels of carbs, lipids, and amino acids. It detoxifies things and stores vitamins. It's the gatekeeper.
Second is hematological regulation.
Right. It's a huge blood reservoir, and it has special phagocytic cells, Kupffer cells, that clean up old red blood cells and pathogens. It also makes most of your plasma proteins.
And third, bile production.
Crucial for digesting lipids. Bile contains bile salts, which break up large fat droplets into smaller ones that enzymes can actually work on.
Anatomically, the liver is made of tiny hexagonal units called lobules.
About 100,000 of them. Inside, liver cells, or hepatocytes, are arranged in plates. Blood flows through channels called sinusoids towards a central vein.
And at the corners of these lobules, you have the portal areas, or triads.
Right. Each triad contains a branch of the hepatic artery, a branch of the hepatic portal vein, and a small bile duct. So blood flows in and bile flows out.
The bile gets collected and can either go straight to the duodenum or be diverted to the gallbladder.
Right. Through the cystic duct. The gallbladder's only job is to store and concentrate bile.
And it's the hormone CCK that tells it to contract and release that bile.
Precisely. Now, for the last accessory organ, the pancreas, tucked in behind the stomach.
It has both endocrine and exocrine functions.
It does, but the vast majority of it is exocrine. It's made of pancreatic acini that secrete pancreatic juice into the duodenum.
And that juice is packed with buffers.
Absolutely essential, mostly sodium bicarbonate, to neutralize that stomach acid.
And it contains all the enzymes needed to finish the job.
Right, a whole cocktail of them. Lipases for fats, carbohydrates for starches, nucleases for nucleic acids, and powerful proteolytic enzymes for proteins.
And this is all coordinated by those duodenal hormones again. Secretin triggers the buffer release.
And CCK triggers the enzyme release. It's just a beautiful, coordinated chemical response.
As robust as this system is, though, it does change with age. The efficiency starts to wear down.
It does. We see 4 common changes. First, the rate of epithelial stem cell division declines,
making tissues more fragile and repair less efficient.
Right, so you see a higher risk of things like peptic ulcers. Second, smooth muscle tone decreases,
which slows everything down, leading to constipation and can weaken sphincters, causing more heartburn.
Third is just cumulative damage. Years of wear and tear on teeth or damage to the liver from toxins like alcohol can lead to conditions like cirrhosis.
And finally, because of that constant cell turnover, you just see an overall increase in cancer rates, especially in the stomach and colon.
So when you step back, what's the big takeaway? We've followed a meal through this incredible system, from the mouth to the stomach's unique churning layer, through 200 square meters of absorptive surface, all coordinated by the pancreas and the liver acting as this massive metabolic gatekeeper.
It really is an engineering marvel. The efficiency and the specialization are just incredible. So building on those age-related changes, here's a final thought for you. The digestive process starts with sensory analysis, smell, and taste. And we know those senses decline with age, which affects what people eat. So how essential is the sustained sensory pleasure of food to maintaining long-term nutrient intake, and by extension, the health of the entire physical system?
That is certainly something for you to chew on. That wraps up this deep dive into the anatomical complexities of the digestive system. Thank you for sharing your source material with us, and we hope you feel ready to absorb this knowledge efficiently.